Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this workshop organized by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Future of Work Competence Center in cooperation with FES Spain and Portugal and FES Romania on the topic of online platforms, platform work, and platform workers. This is the second edition of cross-regional events, and we'll be hearing today from the experiences of platform work in 4 countries: Portugal, Romania, Spain, and Germany. I'm John-Paul Judson, delighted to be your host today. I founded Now More 4 years ago to become an independent moderator, and my background is in sociology. I've always taken a keen interest in social issues. And indeed, one of my favorite authors is David Harvey. And in one of his books called Rebel Cities, he outlines how the Marxist vision of capital versus labor has shifted away from an industrial context and into an urban context. And the way platform work has so deeply transformed our experience of cities, I think, is very evocative of this shift. So I'm very excited to be surrounded by great experts and practitioners in the field who will be sharing their insights on the regulatory frameworks and working conditions of platform working. Quickly on housekeeping, the event is recorded and the videos will be published on the FES website. You will receive an email with the links after the event. The event is also being translated in German, Romanian, Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and indeed some of the speakers will be speaking in their native language. So if you wish to follow the event in your language, feel free to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select your preferred option. For the audience, please also ask your questions via the Q&A tool. We will be monitoring that, and I'll be doing my best to raise a lot of your questions to our speakers. The event will be split in 2 parts, each reflecting the views from the 4 different countries. We will aim to first describe the current situation of platform work, and then we will look at what would be required to address the challenges posed by platform working. We will have a short break in between to allow the interpreters to breathe a little, and for you, the audience, to stretch your virtual legs. Okay, but before we get started, I'd like to hand over to Oliver Phillip, who is Policy Officer at FES in charge of Future of Work, for his introductory remarks. Oliver.
Yes, thank you very much, Jean-Paul. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is with a great pleasure that I warmly welcome you also on behalf of the Competence Center Future of Work by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung to the 2nd edition of our online events on online platforms, platform work, and platform workers in different European countries. After focusing last time on Nordic countries and Germany, I'm really looking forward to the discussion today on the platform economy in Portugal, Romania, Spain, and Germany. I also would like to give a special welcome to our speakers for today. It is really great to have you here, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. As it was already said by Jean-Paul, my name is Oliver Phillip, and I'm a policy officer at the Competence Center Future of Work based in Brussels. So this event wouldn't be possible to be organized without the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Spain and Portugal and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Romania. So also on their behalf, I warmly welcome you to this event today. I had a quick look before at the participant list, and I see a lot of people, of course, from Portugal, Spain, Romania, and Germany, but I'm also happy to see a lot of participants from other countries. And I think that shows that the regulation of online platforms and how to protect platform workers is currently discussed in a lot of European countries. And of course, one reason why the topic moved into focus is the proposal of the European Commission for a directive on improving working conditions in platform work, which is currently discussed in the European Parliament. So please allow me now to very briefly explain to you our intention behind today's event. So we at the Competence Center Future of Work wanted to go beyond the current debate on the directive focusing mainly on the employment status of platform workers. So we were interested in understanding how online platforms, how platform economy is changing the nature of work in different countries. So that is why we started last year our research project mapping platform economy in Europe. And our aim was to give an overview of the existing platform economy landscape in over 30 countries, and to shed some light on the complexity by providing visualization of several regulatory aspects of platform work. And therefore, we collected data in all these countries based on secondary sources and created maps that give you an overview, for example, in which countries an official definition or a national register of online platforms exists, or where platform workers are recognized as employees, or where collective agreements at a sectoral, regional, or company level exist. And you can find all these results on our website, and we will share the link later with you in the chat. So no worries. But while collecting all these data in all these countries, we realized that there are many differences between the countries regarding public discourse or national regulations for protection of platform workers. So this is, for example, also the case in Spain and Portugal, that they do have, with a so-called wider and jubilar national laws for specific sectors of the platform economy, but many countries such as Germany or Romania, for example, do not. And one other aspect we realized while doing our research is that much still remains unknown when it comes to platform companies and platform work. And for example, the number of platform companies or the number of platform workers working in this sector. So this is why we believe that for the current political debate on regulating platform economy, it is very helpful to look with a cross-regional perspective on platform work in different countries. And that's what we want to do today. So I think with Portugal, Spain, Romania, and Germany, we have countries today that have many differences, but still facing the same challenges. So I'm very happy that we can discuss today with the researchers from our project the main characteristics of platform work in these countries, and in a second panel, discuss the challenges and how to address them with workers and trade union representatives. And in order to start the debate, I will now stop here. So thank you very much for your attention. I wish all of us a great debate, and thank you for joining us today. So Jean-Paul, I will hand over back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. And indeed, it's a moving target, but you've done a lot of work on mapping and trying to characterize platform work. And this is what we will try and describe in a first panel. So I would like to welcome our first panelists to this session. Tatiana Lopez Ayala, she is postdoctoral research fellow at the Fair Work Secretariat at WZB Berlin Social Science Center. Tatiana, hello.
Hi, now I keep myself unmuted. Hi.
Yeah, absolutely. That way you're with us, you know?
Yes.
Perfect. We also have Nuno Boavida. He is Deputy Director of the Technology Assessment Observatory of the Interdisciplinary Center of Social Sciences at the New University of Lisbon. Nuno, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We have also Delia Badoy. She is Research Fellow at the Romanian Academy of Science, Research Institute for Quality of Life. Delia, welcome to you.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hello. And finally, Ruben Rantz. He is Coordinator of Digital Platforms at the Spanish Trade Union UGT. Ruben, welcome.
Hola. Hola. Muchas gracias.
Hello. So just to check if the interpretation as well is working well, but I'm sure we'll get there. Perfect. So you've been doing a lot of work, each of you, in trying to characterize the national level. I'd like to go first maybe to Tatiana to start. Can you give us maybe in a snapshot, an impression about the platform economy in your country, maybe a couple of figures that would be interesting for us to to know?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I think I must disappoint you a bit because there are no really robust figures about the platform economy in Germany. Every time we're asked about this by journalists or other researchers, we have to disappoint them. So the figures that there are, however, point to the fact that the platform economy is a growing sector, but not yet a very dominant one in terms of the general economy in Germany. So in terms of how many people do work on these platforms, there are also different numbers. A study that was commissioned by the European Commission in 2018 found that about 12% of Germans had already used digital platforms to provide services and make an income from that. So 12% doesn't sound low, but this study also included platforms such as eBay or Airbnb, so therefore not necessarily only gig work. Other studies found that only like less than 1% of the German-speaking population had already made a significant income from platform work. So as we can see, we don't have very robust figures, but it seems that that it's not yet a very significant share of the labor market. The labor market is not being taken over entirely by platforms yet. However, we do see specific sectors where we have seen a very stark growth over the past 2 years, and one is the food and grocery delivery sector. Here we have seen a really mushrooming number of platforms entering the market in the past 2 years, also in the context of the COVID pandemic. And as opposed to other countries, for example, in Berlin right now, there is more than 7 platforms just specializing on food and grocery delivery that are competing with each other for clients, but interestingly also for workers. So these platforms also have, are increasing their market share, and also estimates from business and market research estimates that the revenue made by online food delivery platforms is about 5.8 billion in 2022. So so in that sense, within the platform economy, food and grocery delivery really does have a strong stand. Whereas the platform economy is not yet so significant in terms of overall market and labor market shares. The food and grocery delivery sector has really grown a lot in the past 2 years, with many new platforms entering the market. Besides the food and grocery delivery sector, we do have a ride-hailing sector, but due to very strict regulation, it is not so big. There's only 2 platforms operating currently, FreeNow and Uber. And drivers cannot individually sign up with these platforms. They have to sign up through a fleet management company. So therefore, I think that is why many platforms consider to never enter the German market or left it again. And lastly, I think an important sector that is often receives too little attention in media and policy debates is the care work and domestic services sector. Here we also have several platforms that provide services from elderly care to walking your pet, to babysitting or cleaning, helping you move. And I think especially these platforms, they are largely unregulated, as opposed to the 2 other sectors that I mentioned, and therefore also tend to have very precarious working conditions. I think I'll stop here and I'll talk a bit more about the conditions in each sector later, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So your starting point is actually there is not a lot of data out there, but you still identify these booming markets that will have a big impact on platform work. If we then go to Portugal, as we had the interpretation channel trying to take over, it's time to go to Portugal with Nuno. Can you tell us, give us a quick snapshot then of the picture in Portugal?
Yes, Jean-Paul, thank you. Well, actually, the platform economy has been growing very fast. It started in 2009 with the coming of Airbnb. We take Airbnb as a starting point of this transformation. And in 2014, we received Uber and this created a very controversial debate in our society. So Uberization it's a word that is already connected. It's mainly connected with this precarious situation of work. The importance of all these sectors related to platform is increasing and significantly increasing according to the latest numbers. Here I have to agree also with Tatiana, there are not very reliable numbers, but we and the rest of my research team, we come up with a number around 80,000 workers, which is already very much of our workforce. So I would point to 8% of our workforce has some sort of connection with platform work. And I don't have any numbers about the volume or the euros involved in this, because it's highly unregulated, except for the Uber sector, as we will see in a few minutes. I also would like to say that we study 5 platforms here in Portugal in a comparative form with other colleagues, and the main, I would say, the main difference related to the other countries was with Airbnb, in which in Portugal was very important after the crisis of 2011, 2013. Airbnb was quite an important platform for most Portuguese. So I don't know if you want me to address some social demographic conditions, also characteristics of this population.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so the biggest platform is obviously Uber. We accounted something like around 18,000 drivers who are able to engage with this platform, and then we have, after that, we have Glovo and also Uber Eats, the delivery of food. This is also a very important and growing market. And very important is also the Upwork platform. For those who don't know it, it's freelance IT design and so on platform. And these freelancers are not accountable, but we have the impression that they are growing. They are growing in a big number and in a growing number. So yeah, those are the main features of the country, and yeah, Uber is the main player here.
Okay, so we heard about 12% of Germans are somehow connected to platform work, 8% maybe in Portugal, but the numbers are not necessarily so reliable. If I then go to Delia, in the Romanian situation, can you give us a snapshot of Romania?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. I will start by saying a few words about the social context of platform economy in Romania. First of all, online platforms operate within the existence of the labor regulation and fiscal code that allow somehow intermediated company to employ platform workers as subordinated employees. In my research, I observed that intermediated employers are present, especially in the food delivery sector and on-location service, and employ people with part-times and temporary contracts. Somehow, online platforms are encouraged to have these employment arrangements with workers in order to avoid employment-related costs and shift economy risks into the platform workers' working conditions. So, second, I want to mention the specificity on the context of the COVID-19, because it's very recent and somehow influenced the presence of the platform work in Romania. For instance, while businesses in many sectors have been strongly affected by introduction of emergency measures, and they had to stop or temporarily suspended during the pandemic, somehow the rollout of the platform economy has provided new business opportunities and jobs, especially within the food delivery sector. So for Romania, working opportunity raised within the platform economy and have become a strong alternative for traditional economic activities affected by the economic crisis in a way. So platform work, in my opinion, has become an opportunity to replace unemployment leave during the pandemic crisis. And somehow traditional companies that have used to have face-to-face activities move to digital working conditions, especially in the delivery sector where and micro, somehow only online micro work activities. So the accommodations and hospitality industries, which is also a good example, were largely affected not only by the lockdown, for example, but only by changes in consumer behavior. For example, people were avoiding restaurants and they were just ordering food at home. So right now, I just want to point some data, if it's possible to share. I will start to share my screen. Not sure if you can
we
see
can, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So right now, some data. I will take the example of two platforms. The platform economy in Romania, according to empirical data that are available for our country, remain below the average of the European Union countries. I might say that the food delivery sector represents one of the largest sectors in the platform economy in Romania. For example, in the past 2 years, Glovo platform managed to expand the majority of their services in the largest city of Romania. Glovo services are provided by couriers paid per hour. According to Glovo algorithmic management, which calculates the number of the orders and the total time spent on the app. So with an estimated revenue of 6.5 million and registered in Romania, started with 2018, if I know quite sure, by this intermediated company called Glovo Apro SRL. The estimations are that about 5,000 couriers are active in this moment on the app, but I'm sure the number is not that sure that it's this number, or maybe are much more. And in total, the estimation it's about 40,000 people. So Glovo is not officially registered in Romania. Glovo is operating to an intermediated company that collaborate with the Spanish delivery platform. So along with this type of subordinated and atypical arrangement of work, platform workers are also represented by freelance agreement and also self-employment agreement, which I will be discussing a bit later. So aside from this global platform food delivery platform Glovo, other platforms like Uber have a significant market share with a higher overall revenue compared to the national domestic platforms in Romania. So according to this European Commission survey, the highest volumes of jobs were in the transport platforms, and Uber has the highest share of employment, and also a good expand of geographic extension in the majority of the cities in Romania. According to our legislation, platform workers are self-employed and legal persons, so mostly freelance people. I will stop here, and I will maybe
yeah, I mean, we'll
continue later.
we'll have time to go over these things. I mean, definitely the idea of these intermediary employers would be interesting also to hear how that is shaped in other countries. But first, let's also hear then from Spain with Ruben. Can you give us a snapshot of the situation in Spain?
Bueno, pues fundamentalmente el informe.
Essentially, the report that comes closer to the situation in Spain is that of Eurofond, that says that in 2021, at least 18% of the population had worked or achieved some kind of revenue through online and digital platforms. We have to make introduce a nuance, because there was a rider law that was passed recently, and then it had to be amended by the platforms. And what we can say is that recently the Ministry of Work has stated that more than 12,000 people have an indefinite contract, and they have stopped being freelancers to become salaried employees. And that's an important element that I would like to highlight, because there's been controversy around this rider law, but what we can for sure say is that setting clear rules generates jobs and employment, and that's an important element to state very clearly. Then we can analyze it more in detail if you like. And then I would like to ask or to tell the colleague from Romania, be careful with Glovo, because we've had many court hearings with Glovo, and they consider that it is working time only when the order is placed, not all the time that they are connected. And that's a distinction that we have to make. We were able to prove that before court, and that was working time. All the time that they spent on the street was working time, and that is also related to the working time regulation at European level. That's a discussion that is right now on the spotlight, and they try to mistake one for the other, and that's an essential element that we have to state very clearly.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Ruben, and maybe then to Tatiana on the status of workers. Can you also give us a sense in Germany how that is organized? Do you have a reaction also to some of what you've heard in Romania and in Spain?
Yeah, sure. I think I see some interesting differences, but also similarities. So interestingly, in the food and grocery delivery sector, which has been growing the most, all workers in the warehouses and on the street, the riders, are formally employed. They have formal employment contracts. Yet many of them are part-time employees and with very flexible scheduling, often also very flexible work contract with only a very limited hour that is guaranteed. So they never necessarily know how much they're going to earn at the end of the month, because it also will depend on the demand. So it is so in a sense they are covered by very important labor rights, such as the right to the minimum wage, right to paid sick leave, and these things. But then in reality, it's sometimes hard to realize because of the flexibility of the scheduling. So for example, if there's a holiday on a Monday or Tuesday, will you still get paid? Because they might just schedule you for a different day then. Or you were sick, they might ask you to just, oh, you were sick on the Monday, then, oh, come work on the Tuesday, So this hyper flexibility of the employment contract still makes it a bit hard to actually implement all these rights that these workers in theory should have. And what we also see, and I see parallels to what Delia was saying, so to ensure the flexibility, depending on venture capital that these companies work with, but also regarding to fluctuations in demand, most of these companies, they now have resorted to also hiring a lot of workers through temp agencies, through intermediary agencies. And this has also been creating some problems because it segments the workforce. It has been creating challenges for collective organization. And also kind of further flexibilizes these employment relations. That is the situation in food and grocery delivery. I think with Uber and Freenow, which are ride-hailing platforms, as I said, these workers don't have direct relations with the platform, but similar also to how Glovo operates in Romania, they work through exclusive or through partners that Uber partners with, these fleet management companies, and with them, they also have employment contract, but also very flexible, very precarious ones, which sometimes even work with a commission-based remuneration model. So there's no guaranteed pay, no guaranteed paid holidays. And lastly, the care work platforms, which, as I was noticing, none of my other colleagues mentioned. So I would also be interested to hear if they play a role in the other countries, because these are really the most precarious ones, because here we have self-employed workers mainly, not on all of them, but on most of them. And these fall through the cracks of all labor regulation. Some platforms allow workers and clients to set rates that are below the minimum wage, actually. So you can ask a worker to babysit at your house for, I don't know, 6-7 euros a day, when the minimum wage is not a day, per hour, when the minimum wage is 12 euros per hour. And obviously also these workers work in very unregulated spaces, which are some kind of, when the home of another person becomes the workspace, then there's also problems, because yeah, it's not very transparent. Nobody regulates it. Workers are not protected, for example, from yeah, sexual harassment, all these things.
Yeah, it's true that food and groceries and the transport, urban mobility have been mentioned. It would definitely be interesting to hear if the caring sector is also important in other countries. Maybe to Nuno first, because in Portugal you do actually have an official definition of online platforms in legislation. There's been a lot of controversy, but you do have some kind of legal framework. Has that helped to create more stable and more solid legal frameworks also in terms of employment contracts in Portugal?
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Well, there is indeed a framework, but it was created in 2019 just for Ubers. So Ubers and other type of platforms for for personal transport. This was a very special regulation that we created here, and it didn't really work out in many areas, and it's being revised right now in the country. So having these regulations, it did not really improve the situation. What created is a situation similar, maybe similar to what Delia described in Romania, where you have these intermediate companies that hire workers, supposedly hire workers, but in the end, the lack of formality in this relationship end up being, well, just informal economy. So the law was not really well created. It does provide information about who's driving and who's the owner of the car and so on. But in terms of solving the employment status, it was not very helpful. We are now having a strong debate with trade unions and employers associations and the government, who's going to legislate in the coming weeks just about this situation. But it will also have reflections on other platforms such as food delivery, in where the presumption of employment will be turned in favor of the employee, and force the employer to prove that he is not a worker. So I don't know if I fully addressed your question, Jean-Paul.
Well, yes, I mean, in the sense that it obviously has not necessarily helped. And in a way, you have a similar situation to what Delia was describing in Romania, even if in Romania you don't necessarily have a very strong regulatory framework or any clear definition. So what kind of regulation do you think would be important to have in Romania, Delia, to try and structure this employment space?
Well, difficult question, but also a simple one in a way. So in Romania, the employment status of platform workers usually fall under the traditional labor legislation of the labor code. In this case, I think the issue of the uncertain employment status of a platform worker remain, in my opinion, the main risk of the lack of protection, which can involve precarious work and insecurity of work. Basically, the category of platform workers are situated between the border of self-employment status and temporary and atypical forms of employment. We know that platform workers face a number of risks related to their contractual terms and working conditions. In this case, we are talking about the social protections, both in terms of formal coverage and effective coverage. So according to our labor framework, the gray area of the self-employment and informal work is regulated by the fiscal code and fiscal authorities who have to manage if there are workers employed with bogus self-employment or informal contracts. And this distinction between self-employment and subordinated employment status is regulated by the Romanian Labor Code, which in the case does not provide a legal definition for distinguishing specific the employment status of a platform work. I might say that there is a need for a more coherent legal binding for solo self-employment status of platform workers. On the other hand, this type of legal binding of a platform worker can reduce in a way the risk of insecure wages, intermittent employment contracts, and can provide more security by according access to social protection. Concerning the bargaining power for the platform workers, we know in Romania that there were some small organization of key attempts that were mentioned in media discourse during the pandemic time, where delivery workers from Glovo organized small and informal protests to improve their working condition. And our legislation for social dialogue is typically limited to subordinated employees. But in this case, many of them are self-employed or legal persons or freelance in an economic dependency with a platform, or in a way with intermediated company. In Romania, trade unions don't have the right to recruit self-employees. Another problem is that we don't have a register in Romania that provide information on active platforms. There are no national data on how many exact people are working to these platforms or under what employment status they are working. The absence of the platform worker legal definitions contribute, in my opinion, to different ambiguities related to the understanding of the functioning of the platforms. Global platform companies in Romania use different terms and standard conditions for workers and provide, in a way, similar working conditions across labor markets in other European countries, but also in Romania. This fact highlights, in a way, the need for a more coherent definition or more coherent employment status, especially when self-employment status is involved. I believe that the legal binding can reduce the risk of these insecurities and the risk of the lack of continuity of work and the lack of social protection, especially when the algorithmic management is involved in the functioning of online platforms.
Thanks. I'd like to maybe bring Ruben in here, because he mentioned how the rider law in Spain helped to shift from a freelance status to a salaried work status. But as I understand it, that would be more for the transport sector, and maybe that's in opposition precisely to a sector that's already well established and well regulated when it comes to work status. Do you see a similar shift through this law also in the food and beverage and groceries delivery sector, and maybe even in the care sector, as Tatiana mentioned in Germany? Can you maybe comment on that for Spain, Ruben?
Sí, por supuesto.
Yes, of course. Well, I would like to explain that the rider law before the agreement was reached The government, the employers association, and the main trade unions of this country were involved. But before that, there was a ruling by the Supreme Court. This ruling said that a worker, a global worker, had to be considered as an employee. This is very important because it basically said that the court didn't need any change in the law. They didn't need to adapt the law to understand platform work. This is very important because with the wider law, we've never changed the approach of this labor relationship and the self-employed worker. This difference still exists. Therefore, we need to explain that these workers were never self-employed. They've always been false self-employed. They depended on the platform. The platform required the establishment of price. They were punished if they didn't follow guidelines, even with dismissal. There was always a dependence, and the profit was taken by the platform, not the worker. So they weren't self-employed. So this is a very important factor. What the rider law did was two things. They added a specific article on algorithm management. This information has to be provided to works councils, and starting from now, works council will have access to the algorithm management that has an impact on work organization. And second, and I apologize because I'm speaking too fast. Second, it added an additional disposition where it was established, clearly established, that workers of digital platform for delivery are employed. Why delivery platforms? Well, while there was collective bargaining, in order to reach an agreement in this sense, one of the requirements by the Employers Association was this. So in this aspect, it was rather a message for those who had caused the social conflict. We cannot forget that labor inspectors registered more than 25,000 people as false self-employed. This was a huge fraud for Social Security. One of our studies that was published in 2018, Work in Digital Platforms by UGT, by that we proved that digital platforms saved 168 million euro a year for 13 workers. That those savings in salary costs and contributions to Social Security was very significant. So we said that if that was transferred to the labor model, the loss of jobs was going to be so huge, and the Social Security contributions that were going to be lost was going to be there as high as in the worst year of the economic crisis in 2011. So the drop in Social Security was going to be very significant. And this is the main element of the rider law. It showed very clearly, and I apologize for repeating it, it established very clearly that there was a labor relationship, and they didn't change anything of worker status, which was the main rule. And regarding care work platforms for the elderly, we've done some research, and we found the same situation as in Germany. I'm happy that Tatiana has brought this up, because this is a situation that's very precarious, basically because workers are not like riders. You see them on the street. They're easy to locate. Here they're working within a home. We cannot go into the home. You have to bear in mind that under Spanish regulation, you can have a special contract for home workers. There's the special regime for home workers. They have a different Social Security contribution system. So they're already precarious, and even their contributions are lower. It has been recently changed, and home workers will start to have the same contributions as other workers. This is going to be a small help, but we cannot reach them. We cannot help them. Actually, we filed claims against different platforms because we understood that they were not intermediary. These platforms established prices, hierarchy, They replaced staff when customers considered that the service was not a good one. And obviously they organized all the activities and they used algorithmic management to organize all the work. And because of all of these, we understood that there was a labor relationship. So far, we haven't been able to prove it. The labor inspectorate does not agree with us, but we will continue to work because we understand that this sector is very important. There's been a huge growth after COVID, among other reasons, because they are considered the best alternative to homes for the elderly. It's the best way to turn this work into a precarious thing, because it's the cheapest way of having someone to take care of an old person 24/7.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview, Ruben. I think it's extremely important to get that case well understood in Spain. And I'd like to get a reaction from the other panelists. I can maybe start with Tatiana, and especially on this algorithm management and the transparency that these platforms should provide on the algorithm to authorities to be able to monitor the working conditions. Can I get a reaction from you then on the situation in Germany in relation to this?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, I can say something about the algorithmic management, but I think one other thought that I would like to express in reaction before I forget it is that I think we need to think beyond just the misclassification. I think this is always the most straightforward way to tackle rights and to give workers some basic rights, and which is super important. But I think what we have seen in all the in everything we heard from all the panelists here is that just formal employment in itself does not necessarily grant or guarantee that workers' rights are actually implemented, because platforms find ways to get around it through temp agencies, through flexible contracts, through through lots of forms. So I think what and there I want to connect to something that Delia mentioned, that we need to think also about worker power, right, and worker organizing and collective bargaining, and how to create structural and regulatory frameworks that enable workers to organize collectively and to really demand the implementation of all the rights that they might have on paper, but which sorry, I think I'm talking fast again, well, which in reality might not necessarily be implemented. And here I can make a link to algorithmic management, because Ruben mentioned the comités de empresa, which are something that we also have in Germany, which here is called Betriebsrat or Works Council, and it's like an in-company representation, a collective body of workers, and they have so-called co-determination rights in some areas of the work process, and one of them is actually the implementation of new technology that changes work processes fundamentally. So in theory, works councils here in Germany have these co-determination rights to demand transparency, to demand information on algorithms used. If these algorithms are changed, in theory, they would need to consent. But now in practice, they have been, I think maybe the colleague in the next panel will talk about it more, but they have been, for example, Lieferando Works Council has been very active in getting more information on this, on these algorithms used, but the employers, the platforms, they are not very willing to give this information, and they find ways around it by providing information that is not particularly useful, but which kind of satisfies the requirements to provide information. So I think really strengthening the collective bargaining power of these workers here is crucial. And for that, one thing that I want to mention in Germany is, for example, the problem that the strike law doesn't allow for spontaneous strikes, only if it's convened by an official union and it's related to, more or less rights that could fall under collective bargaining agreement. But in the end, since also workers do not necessarily see a long-term perspective in the sector, for many, they do it a few months, maybe 6, maybe a year, but it's not like they have the time and the long breath to maybe work for a collective bargaining agreement that may happen in a year or two. Like they need changes and they need improvements now. And for that, spontaneous strikes have in Germany been the tool of choice for many workers, but right now they are not covered under the legal framework for industrial relations, and workers have been dismissed because management said these strikes were illegal. So I think we also need to think more in these directions and go beyond a bit this question of misclassification.
Thanks. Yeah, interesting. Nuno, in Portugal, on the algorithm management and transparency to authorities, what's the situation?
Well, we don't have any regulations regarding algorithms or neither transparency. However, these debates that we have been having in the last year, I would say, are towards a consensus around having transparency enforced. I was a few weeks ago in a cafe with employers as well as with employees of Uber. They were very consensual in terms of having as much as possible a transparency of the costs as well as other technicalities of Uber. And I think from the government point of view, which in Portugal is very important, having transparency about algorithms in the food delivery sector is also totally acceptable, and it will pass in the parliament without any constraints. I would like also to say something just to connect with Tatiana in terms of workers' organization. The platform, the digital platform world has never been defended by trade unions in Portugal, with one single exception, which was in the Uber case, in the individual transport, and that was exactly because there was a law. So state intervention is critical to have a workers' organization. It was very interesting because this trade union not only started to defend Uber workers, but also Uber employers, in the sense that they now have to have a company to be, in order to be working as Uber drivers. And furthermore, a few weeks ago, they start organizing Uber Eats, because they consider that Uber Eats is also a form of individual transport. And so they decided to start to organize them. This is, well, rather new, but it's an interesting development. Nevertheless, and to conclude, I would say the labor relations system does not cover at all, and neither in conventions, neither in terms of trade unions, does not cover and protect platform workers in the country.
Okay, thanks, Nuno, and Delia as well in Romania. A reaction on the algorithm management and transparency to authorities.
Well, I agree with Tatiana and Nuno, because we don't have a specific regulation of the this new management, new business models that sometimes appear in media discourses. So I might say that the instability of work again and the precarious working conditions of platform workers in Romania results in a poor understanding, first of all, of the bargaining relationship between the platform, the intermediated company, and the worker, especially when the algorithms are involved in the measurement of the worker's performance, and they are determining, in a way, their income. The flexibility provided by the algorithmic management produce, in a way, frequent changes in the work content and increase stress for workers. Especially when we are referring to couriers from the delivery sector. They are usually not aware and cannot predict order pickups, locations, destination address. And at the same time, they are the only one responsible for delivering orders in a good condition. This contradiction could be, as I mentioned it, a great stress for them. This type of labor process behind the algorithm management could also classify workers in Romania depending on this excellence score that appears in the delivery platforms, usually on the application, that is calculated through different positive, negative rankings that they couriers receive from customers. And again, because the terms and conditions are changing really fast when accessing the platforms, people working on delivery platforms are often not aware on how these algorithms are working and how they are influencing their work. Because I was conducting interviews with couriers, very often in their discourse, they were mentioning that they don't understand how they are receiving the income, their income, how this is calculated in a way. Somehow they are referring to the app as a person. So I think it's a need for much more regulation in this management or algorithmic management, new business model in a way.
Yeah, that's an intriguing point, because you talk about this sort of dehumanized management, and at the same time it's like the crowd is almost your employer in that sense, you know, giving points, and you're not really able to manage that or to have a proper feedback, a human feedback in a way. And there's a question in the audience which I would like to try and raise to you as a kind of a concluding remark from you. I think it would be interesting to hear. Because you've talked about these intermediary bodies that are being set up, and the question is around, you know, what you see as the best regulatory response to the emergence of these intermediaries, and to avoid that platforms use these as a way to circumvent regulation. And it does seem like, in a way, they would be outsourcing some of these employment issues, management issues, to other bodies, you know, because the capital is in the digital platform. And so you outsource the problems elsewhere. So as a kind of a concluding remark, it would be interesting to hear your views on what would be the best regulatory response, or what you're hearing maybe in your on your national level. I could maybe start with Ruben in Spain.
Bien, nosotros actualmente tenemos...
Well, we currently have the three possible situations. We have platforms that outsource directly the activity to salaried workers like Uber Eats. We have platforms that hire directly their own workers with a collective agreement, like the case of Just Eat, where we have a labor agreement where they specify the working conditions and they regulate the digital rights. And for example, we got rid of the profiles of the riders so that they can never be assessed through a like or dislike. That's an important topic. We have regulated that, and there's still a lot to be done. But we also know how the algorithm should be managed, so to speak. We've created a committee between the legal representatives of the workers and the company or employer, where there will be a clear explanation of how the algorithm works. And when I say understandable, I don't mean that we are going to create the source code or the whole structure, but just for them to explain to the workers' representatives how decisions are made. And then we also have other companies, like the case of Glovo, that still have those fake freelancers, so to speak. Of course, the best approach would be the second one that I explained, where the company hires directly, and through collective bargaining, we can establish the rules, and that generates certainty both for the employer and for the employees. Another important element that we introduce in the Just Eat collective agreement is that they guarantee a minimum number of hours per week to the workers, so they know how much they are going to make every month and how much they are going to work. And above all, they will know how money is made. And I think that we still have a lot to do in some areas. There are companies that refuse to abide by the laws, but that is not a problem of the negotiation. It is a problem. Disobedience on the part of the companies might entail criminal consequences for them. The Minister of Work said that they are going to report Glovo through the state attorney for the non-payment of more than 8 million euros to the administration, to the tax authorities. And so that could perhaps have criminal consequences. And it is important that for us, the right regulation would be collective bargaining. We've been able to organize the workers. They are now unionized, and they have chosen their union representatives. We've spent the whole summer doing elections so that they can choose their representatives. And I think that's the normal situation that provides legal certainty. And that's, for me, the most important element. There's no discussion in Spain anymore about the framework of salaried employees or freelancers. Everyone knows that they are within the statute of workers and that they have to apply a collective agreement.
Thanks a lot, Ruben, for having shared these insights from Spain. Tatiana, I was seeing you nodding in agreement. What do you think is the best regulatory response to this outsourcing phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, outsourcing is something that is happening all across sectors, not only in the platform economy. So here, I think this is a general trend that we see towards a flexibilization and segmentation of labor relations in many fields. And so here, really, I mean, other countries have had, for example, India has had a legislation that did not permit the outsourcing of core activities to, for example, temporary agencies, but it's also being diluted now because it doesn't give this flexibility that employers need under a very under capitalism these days. So so the question is, so I think this is a very broad policy debate that doesn't only apply to the platform economy, but I think for the platform economy, what is really important is that the platforms have the responsibility and are legally obliged to also at least make sure that the workers that are hired via temp agencies have at least the same conditions in terms of benefits, wages, working year, than the ones that come through a temp agency. Because if you are a normal company, if you have a factory and you hire workers through a temp agency, you will still be obliged to make sure that they have safety, that they work in an environment, that they have access to drinking water, to toilets, and so on. So platforms should not be exempted from having this responsibility for workers that are hired through a temp agency. But in the end, then I think legislation or legal regulation is one side, and the other side is, again, as Ruben mentioned, we need strong unions, collective representation, and then collective bargaining agreements that can, for example, also regulate, can, for example, also forbid temp work or have a say in when workers are hired through temp agencies.
Yeah, I think we're getting into some level of agreement here on the diagnosis. Thank you, Tatiana, for sharing your insights in Germany. Delia, maybe in Romania, just a quick reaction on this double aspect of regulating the outsourcing and at the same time supporting collective bargaining power.
Well, for me, the answer is very simple. We need a register for the international platforms to provide clear information on the active platforms in Romania, to know exactly how many platforms are in this country, how many workers are working through them, and under what employment status. Second, we need the legal recognition of the employment status of a platform worker in order to give them access to social protection, minimum wages, security of work, and also the access to collective agreements. Because the issue here is for the self-employment arrangement. For them, it will be great to benefit of this employment status in order to have access to both collective agreements and social protections, which in this right now they are in somehow outside of this regulation. I think it's
perfect. Yeah.
I will.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Delia, for sharing your insights in Romania and your thoughts. And we'll be addressing some of these in the next panel about how to actually then make all of this happen. And then let's turn to Nuno for your final thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, my final thought is that workers already have to pay 25%, at least in Portugal, to Uber, for example, or to any other platform. Having an intermediary here, it means that they also have to pay for another partner, if you want to. A lot of in our interviews, a lot of these workers complained that they couldn't have a minimum salary in the end of the month, especially if they have to pay a car or a motorbike. So in the end of the day, our experience is that this intermediary figure is a fiction that actually has bad consequences for the employment system, as well as for the social security system, as well as for the collective bargaining system, and so on. It creates a strong informal economy, although at the same hand, it opens the market to, for example, immigrants that arrive here and then in the next day they can start working. But on the other hand, it also creates some sort of criminal activities, such as fake accounts that are used to hire people coming from Pakistan or Bangladesh and so on. So we have a multitude of responses created by these intermediaries that it's really dangerous. At the same time, it hinders the idea of an employed, a subordinate employee. In a sense, it creates more precarious and gives the idea to some of these workers that they can be their own employers. So overall, my thoughts is that this is I think a very bad outcome of a regulatory achievement here in 2009. We now generally conclude that, not just experts and the legislator, as well as the workers, and we will move towards a system where these intermediaries will disappear. Of course, each sector is slightly different. We cannot just talk about digital platforms as a whole, but overall, I would say this is not a very good solution. In my opinion, and I think to most researchers in the area, the best regulation is a normalization of those properly employed, as well as continuing having space for self-employed or freelancers. Otherwise, we have a system actually going on that undermines the employment system, the social security, the health and safety system, and so on and on. So yeah, that's my final thoughts on the intermediary figure.
Thank you so much, Nuno, for having shared also your insights from Portugal. And indeed, I mean, it seems like the flexibility favors mostly the innovator. And then it's a question of where you stand, you know, on this on this world stage. You know, are you with the startup nation, or are you trying to protect workers? And it's not an easy one to do both at the same time. But thank you so much for having shared your insights on the national level and on all the research that you've done to try and capture some of the data that's out there and to translate that to the audience. Thank you. So we will now take a 2-minute break, especially for our interpreters, just to wind down for 2 minutes. It's very difficult to keep up the rhythm when you're an interpreter. And then we'll kick off our next panel at 13 minutes past 5, okay, in 2 minutes time. Okay, so we'll have a quick break and then I'll introduce the next panel. Okay, that was a quick break, but I hope that for the interpreters it was just good enough to take a quick breather. And for you in the audience, maybe you were also able to have a quick drink, because I know this is a passionate discussion, and I can see that you have a lot of questions, which I think we'll be really taking in this next part, because we're really trying now to address the challenges. What are the kind of solutions out there? How can we build this collective bargaining power for platform workers? How can we build a regulatory system that actually protects them? And this is what we'll be discussing now. I would like to introduce then our next four guests. Marcel Borges is a lawyer and Uber driver in Porto. He founded the group Estafetas em Luta, or Riders in Fight in English, to denounce the poor working conditions of riders in Portugal. Marcel, hello, welcome. Are you with us, Marcel? Okay, I hope he came back. Yes, he's there. Hi, Marcel. Brilliant. We also have Antonio Fernandez Cuello. He's an activist and Lieferando, Just Eat Takeaway, delivery rider and works council member from Frankfurt am Main in Germany. Hi, Antonio.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. We have Petru Sorin Dandea, Secretary General of the National Trade Union Confederation Cartel Alpha, one of the 5 national representative confederations in Romania. He's also Vice President of Cartel Alpha between 1996 and 2016, and he is a member of the European Economic and Social Council since 2007. Petru, welcome. And we have also José Domingo Rosello. He is an economist working in the technical department of the Spanish trade union UGT. José, welcome. So we have just heard from these different national perspectives. You're also in those countries, and actually I would just like to hear you on what you've just heard, and to try and capture also, according to you, what are the main challenges regarding platform work in your country. Maybe we can start with Marcel in Portugal. And I think we have an issue with the audio here.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. Y voy a hablar en español.
And I'm going to switch to Spanish. So I think that the most controversial topics around this issue have been discussed in the previous panel. We are now short of ideas to introduce any new elements. Regarding the background of digital platforms and their development, I think that everything took us by surprise. It is true that, imagine, for example, that after the recovery of the last financial crisis in 2017, Uber is created, and at that point, I think that we were all taken by surprise. We were all amazed at the nature of this new creation. It came hand in hand with technological expansion, and for trade unions in every European country, it was difficult to take a critical position or to something that was so new, and that happened to governments themselves. Those are new business models that are supported by strong investors with prestigious voices that sound of modernity, of Silicon Valley, with a huge insertion capacity in governments, in international organization at top level. And of course, it was very difficult to oppose their views, and it took trade unions to difficult situations. Trade unions in Europe are not very prestigious because you seem to be opposing progress all the time. And so we had to keep expectant. The key element regarding platforms, I think, is to distinguish between a clear technological innovation that contributes productivity, that provides a new way to supply services, compared to a different way of exploiting workers that already existed before. It is difficult sometimes to understand that a digital platform is something new when you are managing things such as passenger transportation or delivery that has existed forever. So it is difficult to find what is new there. some of the platforms that we are discussing Glovo, Deliveroo, they don't seem to provide anything new. There was a service that was already being provided. And the main question, the only new thing that comes with them is that they introduce a new element between the worker and the consequence or the outcome of that work. They just take the revenue, extracting it from the worker, and they just get in between the salaried work and the salaried work accrues rights that normally pivot around resting time, certain conditions, vacation, and so on, and also contributions to the social security. And what many of those platforms, supposedly modern platforms, normally revenue and take it for themselves, and they don't contribute anything. And it was very difficult to articulate that at the beginning because we feared being taken as outdated unions. In Spain, it was essential to have a piece of legislation, a law that distinguishes very clearly between situations where someone is a salaried worker or is a freelancer. That allowed us to organize our discourse to devise some kind of methodology to move around this first dilemma. Secondly, we needed to be able to tell something that was quite obvious, which was that those platforms are not that type of business that we all have known. This is not a butcher's, it's not a hairdresser's, it's not a bar. Those platforms, those digital platforms work with a huge amount of capital from investors that can lose money for many years, and that's not common. This is a new kind of animal. This is something that works thanks to its connections, top-level connections with governments and with other organizations and multinationals, and it is someone that has huge capital resources. And the moment you realize that this is no standard business because it is not self-sustained and it is not modern because the only thing that they do is the way in which they dodge the labor regulation, is when you realize that you have a problem, and then you can start acting and generate support. And I'm going to leave it at that for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, there was indeed a wave that took organizations by surprise, governments to some extent, although I'm not sure because they were also very supportive of this, and trade unions. And you mentioned how trade unions were also taken by surprise. And maybe just to get then a reaction also from Petru, as you're also representing a trade union, can you maybe build on what Jose said? Did you also feel that element of surprise initially?
As for anyone, of course, digitalization of the labor relations was a surprise, because for the very beginning, we have seen that these digital workers, if we are calling them this way, even if their activities is not digital, are practically invisible for labor market, invisible for social security system, invisible in relationship with authorities. And immediately we have seen this is a danger. This is a danger because the sector is growing very rapidly. It's a very dynamic sector. And all these challenges are very dangerous for all the system I mentioned. In Romania, what I may say, unfortunately, in Romania, unions are not paying too much attention to these workers because we are still struggling with a big accident we suffered in 2010, when in the aftermath of financial crisis, the Romanian government, pressed by the multinational corporations and global financial institutions decided to completely dismantle the labor market, amending the labor legislation and including in the new legislation huge barriers against collective bargaining. Today, we are not able in Romania to negotiate only hardly at the company level. We no longer have branch collective or sector collective agreements or national collective agreements. That is why in this situation, we cannot, even if we are trying, we cannot defend these workers. But what I would like to tell you, it is what we need first for solving this issue, it is the political will. We believe political will is missing in solving the problem of these workers because they are visible, they are on the street, the authorities are seeing them, but the authorities are not doing anything if they are not pressed by unions and by the society. In Romania, Delia didn't mention it, but in Romania, the government chose to regulate the activity of transport companies like Uber, only when the government faced huge protests organized by taxi companies. Why the taxi companies starting to protest, putting their cars blocking the streets? They started to protest because they felt it is an unfair competition coming from Uber. And they convinced government to regulate the sector. The government regulated the sector, but in a way that corrected the competition. These intermediary companies that have contracts with the drivers are obliged, accordingly with the new regulation in Romania, to pay the same for licensing, insurances, and tax on profits like the taxi companies. But the law says nothing about employees. And for Uber, for example, they are not even considered as employees because Uber intermediaries in Romania are signing a contract with the drivers. They are calling it partnership contract. This is not a labor contract. The labor legislation doesn't cover this. So these people are not considered employees. On the other side, on deliveries, on food and groceries deliveries, we have tens of thousands, as Delia has shown very well. We have seen this year a very strange phenomenon in Romania. At the beginning of the year, the Romanian government came out with a piece of legislation obliging all employers in Romania to pay social contributions at minimum, at the level of the minimum wage, even if an employer says, look, I have 2 employees, each one of them are working 2 hours a day, 2 hours per day. These employers are obliged to pay social contributions, social security contributions, as these 2 people are working a normal working program. This is the legislation the Romanian government have done. What we have seen immediately in Bucharest, for example, which is a big city, where the food delivery, it is very well developed, all the Romanian workers disappeared and they have been replaced by workers coming from Southeast Asia. Why the Romanian workers disappeared? Because paying this social contribution completely at the level of minimum wage, practically working 10 hours a day, the money they left to them are so few, they cannot live. So they cannot match a living wage. That's why they renounced to work in this way, and they have been replaced by workers coming from Philippines, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and they are on the street today in Bucharest. We can see them working around every day, and there are tens of thousands of them working in this way. But it's crystal clear they are working more than 10 hours a day, because otherwise, accordingly with the algorithm of the platform, you cannot have a living wage, even in Romania, which is not a very well-developed member of the European Union. But the minimum wage, gross minimum wage in Romania today, it is 500 euros. So apparently for these people coming from this side of the world, even this, let's say, very few money could be interest in doing a job like this, which, as you know, is not a very easy job. That's why I will stop here, but not before saying to you, in my opinion, the digital era raises these challenges for the labor market, but the good news is the digital could be the solution to this market, because all the activities of these intermediary companies working for platform are practically digital. It's a digital activity that can be easily traced by authorities if the legislation will be put in place, and the authorities will have the right to check and monitor the activities of these companies. And at the European level, I believe we need a directive that really states the fact that the member states should recognize the employment status for these people, because these people are workers in reality. In fact, working for these digital companies, they don't have their employment status recognized by anyone. Thank you.
No, thank you. And it is indeed quite incredible that on the one hand, there's this sort of lawlessness when it comes to these digital platforms. And at the same time, a lot of people working there with almost no capacity to find a place for collective bargaining power, and trade unions also struggling to provide that space for them. And maybe then I'd like to try and get back to Marcel to also get his perspective, because you set up your movement, as I understand it, right, in Porto. So can you tell us about that?
Sim, boa tarde. É grande prazer, os estafetas em luta aqui.
Well, good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be here with you. Let me share the situation in Portugal with you. I work as a deliverer and I've participated on a number of protests against these multinational companies. Unfortunately, they are sort of organized, Bolt, Glovo, and Uber, and they all work together and do not provide the working conditions that we should. Why? Because they are waiting for the changes in legislation, that is the agenda for dignifying work. However, we suspect that this is only a way to postpone and not to provide the best conditions for deliverers to work in a dignifying manner. The main issue is now of having or not having a working salary. We do not want the contract. Why? Because there will be an increase in the risk of tax paying, as Nuno pointed out. We already pay 23%. Which is absurd, because you know, for the drivers they only pay 6%, and they will also control fixed salary, fixed schedule, which is something that worries us. In this agenda for dignifying work, it is a manner of disguising the schedule. Also, accessing the job. There are, of course, a number of situations in which we have been working. There were cases of accidents and casualties, people who died, and Uber won't even respond to us. They don't pay insurance. They don't do anything. And this has to do with the fact that they are working through intermediaries. Also, the in-person contact, they work behind the curtains always. They are cowards. They close themselves inside their own lockers, so to say, and they do not face people. and that they don't pay a single penny when others, institutions that or establishments that have their own doors open, they have to face people face to face. And I do believe that in order to address this problem, we need to have an open debate and collective bargaining. I believe that this would be the best solution. That would include or put around the same table the owners of platforms and representatives of the workers so that they could discuss things openly and do away with all this struggling, this insane struggling, which is only hindering the developments that we want. This is not new. The working relationship, of course, is new because we're talking about digital means that did not exist. But working relationships, subordinate work, lobbies, and so on and so forth, and the fact that the weakest link will always break, and that's us, the deliverers, and that's very unfair. This is what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you, and I would like to go straight also to Antonio, because I would imagine from Germany you would have a similar perspective, maybe a slightly different context, but a similar perspective that you could maybe share with us as well.
Oh yes, I can share. I see in each of your countries effects that we're also having here, especially here in Frankfurt, not only in Germany, but in the center of Europe, where everything comes together. And what I can say is in your countries, by example, in Romania, Romanians, until the change, working in that sector, were a much higher number than in Germany. In Germany, these sectors were traditionally illegal sectors for migrants working illegally. For Romanian men working in this sector here in Germany, working for my company means progress, because they work 10, 15, almost 20 years in this sector delivering pizzas. But our company was the first to give them a contract. No, that's also a perspective one can have, no? Because we have a very diverse fleet from the working student, from the mini jobber, people who work not more than 45 hours a week, to the guy feeding a whole family. And all those groups have completely different perspectives on the job and completely different needs. What I can say is we don't see the elephants in the room. What is happening in each of our countries are developments that happened since the finance crisis in 2008. In each country, those multinationals have some kind of different approaches. In Romania, they bought cars for the people. Here in Germany, the people have to bring their own car if they want to deliver pizza. I myself, I represent that guy on the bike. But to be honest, in our fleet, 50% of the people are driving around with cars, and those people know those jobs. They come from we have the biggest low-income sector of Europe here in Germany. Don't forget that that's something I'm not sure if everybody knows that. And we have a tradition. We talked about that care thing. No? We have a tradition of exploiting migrants. I myself, I come from the so-called Gastarbeiter generation, people who came in the 60s and 70s, no? From Spain, Portugal, Turkey, and so on. And the discussion here in Germany is on different levels. From the view of the unions, they want more members. Okay, but they can have some members, then the news can report something. But in this platform business, most of the deliveries are sent to businesses who have their own employees. And if in my company there are about 10,000 people currently in Corona peak times. Now it's about 7,000 or 8,000 people. And we are, let's say, 10% of the business. We are talking about 100,000 or 150,000 people working in that sector, and only 10,000 are covered by the unions. And that's something we have to talk about here in Germany, to accept that we have an enormous market already exploiting migrants on a large scale, besides our specific problems.
Yeah, and I want to stay on this and get your views, because I think this collective bargaining power issue is extremely important. But as you're describing, you're dealing with a population that is essentially vulnerable. And on the one hand, you have a digital platform that is selling a dream to investors. And then they're trying to make that dream somehow reality on the ground by optimizing costs and processes and essentially optimizing people. I'll put it that way. And how do you get this population, vulnerable groups who are probably looking at this kind of work as at least it's some kind of income, how do you get them on board? How do you build bargaining power in that population? How do you connect them to existing organizations that can support them in the face of giants, essentially? Jose, maybe first, and then we'll do the round.
Muchas gracias. Es un tema.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question that you pose, and we have to be very careful when dealing with it. As Petru was saying before, and Antonio as well, the link between those digital platforms, let's say those platforms that are based on intermediation of work, like the delivery ones or the care ones, those platforms arrive with the promise, as Jean-Paul said, of offering huge revenue to the investors that are looking for projects that give them back a profitability. The platforms are the consequence of very low interest rates and people investing money in whatever project offer them a huge revenue or huge performances. And those platforms, we have a campaign, an advertising campaign of one of those platforms that they are not just happy with intermediating food delivery. They were also asking for a small administrator, like cashiers in a supermarket or security people. They were asking for that type of profile. And the big play, the big gamble of them is to intermediate more and more sectors. And that is a huge risk for society. And what do they need? They need labor that is not very aware of their rights and that are ready to do whatever and to be able to accept those extremely precarious jobs that are in the margins of the labor market. It was shocking for me, something that Antonio said. Here in Spain, at the beginning also, there was a campaign by Glovo that addressed students. And then they discovered the whole marketing at Glovo was that you could work for a few hours and then get lost in Thailand for the summer. And they realized that they could not provide the service that they needed in a day, in a Saturday afternoon, just with people that want to have a link with the company every now and then, and they needed people to be there for the whole day. And then they opened up to the migrants. And then the profile was not a young company for students to start in the labor market. They said that they were doing a social work, hiring people that were difficult to offer jobs to. And that is really outrageous for me. I think it's terrible. Basically, I think it should not be allowed. In Europe, we have a problem with management of migration. We need migrants, but we don't like to recognize it. And then we enable this type of double role where they can come as political refugees, but they cannot work. They have to wait for several years to get a work permit. They can come as students, but then it's difficult for them to become workers because we like to get their money if they come to university, but we don't want to pay salaries to them. So we create this whole sector, this whole area where really those companies and some others that really take advantage of precarious groups of population try to prosper, such as the platforms have been organized, and given the fact that they are the consequence of some circumstances that are not there any longer, I think they will suffer a rearrangement, and I think that the company will be solved by itself, I hope. Thank you.
A quick reaction from Antonio?
Yes, what I wanted to say, in France, they accepted already that about 50% of the people working in that delivery, food delivery, whatever delivery on bike services are sans papier. They accepted it. They know it. They talk about it. Here in Germany, we don't have that officially, but when you talk with the people on the streets, there is a market for logins for the apps you work with. So that this is existing already. Nobody knows the numbers.
And maybe Marcel as well, a comment, because I mean your life story is also somehow represented in some of what we're discussing here.
Exatamente. O problema da
That's exactly that. That's the Pandora box. I mean, provided that you don't open it up, no problem, because everything is kept inside. And so you're faced with this problem. There is no transparency. And so you have to struggle against this invisible enemy, so to say. I really hate to use the word enemy because it looks like, looks bad. But in fact, we need to sit and talk and discuss this. Once again, the issue with, relationship with professionals. We do not believe that the contract will be the solution, but there should be a simpler way. Negotiate figures, negotiate whatever. I mean, see exactly what is the demand for professionals. And we don't know. So the issue lies at the lack of transparency, and also having to deal with the difficulty on the side of the workers to pay the minimum tax required. Of course, companies do not want to pay their share of minimum pays. And so I believe governments will have to consider this. We'll have to take this into account. I do believe that we have to take advantage of this moment of discussion and take a leap forward in order to get the best for everybody. We don't want, the companies in Portugal to just quit platform as happened in Brazil when Uber Eats, for example, started. The government required them to get working contracts and so on and so forth. We don't want that to happen in Portugal. But the fact is that we cannot accept what is happening right now. That is that we do not exist and we are disposable people.
Yeah, and I think this is something that Petru mentioned in his initial. Sorry, yeah, we have again a slight issue with the interpretation in Portuguese. Okay, I think we're good. Petru mentioned this in his initial statement, but I'd like to push you a little bit further, Petru, about what can be done then to address this problem of building bargaining power with groups that may not feel that they can get it, and may not even see that it's important, because they might only see their job as a temporary moment in their life before they get to something else.
Yes, indeed, this is true. This is true. But now, looking to what happens in Romania, here we are not talking about students which are trying to make the money for the Saturday evening. Here we are discussing about people which are making money to feed their families. And that's why the society and the unions should press sufficiently the politicians and the governments to regulate the sector. The regulation of the sector is simple. Romania regulated Uber sector just at the pressure of the taxi companies, but they solve half of the problem. In Estonia, for example, the Estonian government was worried about the drivers, and they solved the problem of the drivers. How they solved the problem of the drivers? They says, if the activity is digital, we oblige the company to report to the banks when they are paying the revenues for the driver, and the bank will retain automatically the social security and contributions and the taxes and move it to the tax system or to the social security system. In this way, the people, it is insured. Now, if we are combining the solution, Romanian solution, solving the problem of competition, obliging these intermediaries to pay the insurances, licenses, and all the stuffs, with the Estonian regulation, obliging practically the intermediary companies to report the revenues they are paying and allowing this revenue to be split between social security system and salary, we have a complete solution, and we can regulate this. That's why, in my opinion, the most difficult topic, and the topic that we should start, it is a European directive which obliged the member states to recognize the employment status for these people.
Yeah, and it's the second time you mentioned the European level, and there was also a question in the audience related to this, you know, what level of regulation would be the best, you know, a global, EU, national, or perhaps even city levels, they say in the audience. So you mentioned twice now this directive, which should be voted in the parliament later this year. Can we maybe just get a sense then also from you on the multi-level governance aspect of this? Because I think someone saying, why not the city level, is quite interesting when we're also talking about a European directive. I mean,
let me tell you,
do you see a role for cities here? So I think there's a slight connection problem, Petru.
Yes,
so
in Romania.
We might just go to Jose now, and I'll get back to you, Petru, because there's a slight connection issue. Jose. Which level of governance?
Muchas gracias. A ver, para mí, claramente hay...
Thank you. For me, there are two different spheres. There's one characteristic of the labor market regulations in Europe is that they are not unified, such as, for example, the financial or the capital markets, or in some cases, the provision of services. Those are unified, but this one in Europe is very much based on regional regulation. Someone was distinguishing, Ruben was talking about the distinction between the Spanish legislation and the rest of the countries. In Spain, it is very clear when someone is a freelancer and when they are a worker, a salaried worker. The legal code establishes that in case of doubt, an inspector will verify a set of questions to determine whether that person is developing a function independently on a self-employed basis. They can establish their own rates, their own working hours. They can provide service to a customer or not. they supply the service in the conditions they establish, that would be a freelancer. And if they depend from someone, if they the rates are established by someone else, then they are a salaried worker. Whatever the parties say, the law establishes very clearly who is a freelancer and who is a salaried worker, and that does not happen in other European legislations, or at least not in all the European jurisdictions. Italy seems to have a very similar system to ours, but I don't want to get into too much detail. But of course, if in Europe we don't have a unified approach, a minimum labor regulation, there have to be actions at national level. Of course, it would be much easier if we had a European legislation that made progress where the national ones do not make progress. Similarly to what happened with minimum wage directive. At the beginning, they had a more ambitious approach, and at the end, perhaps it might be dissatisfying, but at least we have a legislative instrument at community level that establishes that the minimum salary should tend towards 60% of the average salary, that there should be some conditions and so on. And that at the same time favors collective bargaining. And something similar in the field of digital platforms would be very beneficial for us. And in that sense, in my opinion, it would be interesting that the future digital platform directive would establish this presumption of labor contract, but within the council, there are countries that are trying to weaken the directive, but not in order to try to improve it, but to gain an advantage within their own framework. I'm very clear that, and to conclude, that there has to be an action on two levels. First, a European directive establishing that presumption of labor relation, and then other questions like access to algorithms and so on. So 2 or 3 ambitious actions, even if they are not precise, and then we will need national legislation to get into those detailed topics. The distinction between self-employed or freelancer or salaried worker, and depending on the institutions of each country. So 2 levels.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I think that's very helpful also probably for the audience to understand, you know, the relative strengths of European level legislation versus a national level. As we have to wrap up, I'd like to get your thoughts then on this European directive. Maybe your top line demands, your top line hopes for this directive. Jose mentioned a couple of framework conditions that could set a good situation on the national level. Marcel, what would be your key demands for this European directive?
Então, as minhas sugestões para essa diretiva europeia seria justamente que houvesse o controle das horas trabalhadas. Eu digo controle, eu não digo aquela questão engessada que existia antigamente, que você tinha que trabalhar 8 horas por dia e coisa e tal. Não é isso bem que eu estou a falar. Eu acho que seria um grande avanço esse primeiro ponto.
Marcel, just sorry to interrupt you, but I think there's a slight issue with the interpretation in English. So we're getting you in Portuguese. So if you could just try and if you could summarize maybe in 2 words in Portuguese.
Ok, 2 palavras em português. Vamos lá, assim. Fight and esperança.
Okay, that's a great conclusion, actually. That's a great conclusion.
Fight and hope.
Thank you so much, Marcel, for having shared your views. Antonio.
Ordem e progresso.
Antonio, sorry, I didn't hear.
I said ordem e progresso.
Ah, okay, you're really confusing me and the interpreters now. We're completely lost. But okay, Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Antonio, for having shared also your views. And Petru, your hopes for the European directive.
Yes, indeed. I believe that we need to regulate at the European level the recognition of employment status, and all the others, let's say, things should be regulated at the national level. As I said, it is a hope to have finally this legislation in place, because it's not difficult. If there is the political will, we can track the activities of these companies because everything is digital.
Perfect, brilliant. Thank you so much for this sweet and short conclusion. You know, fight, hope, order, progress, and we can actually use digital tools in the right way, you know, to use digital tools to improve transparency and hopefully also working conditions for platform workers who are actually not really platform workers. I mean, they are actually workers out there in real life. They're not actually working on a platform. They're actually working in real life. And I think that came across very much during the course of this discussion. It's been fascinating to get all these different insights from the different countries. There's a lot of research being done on this, and I've heard a couple of other countries being mentioned in Estonia and Italy. So maybe that's also extra work to be carried out to further improve this comparison also between countries. So thank you so much to all the speakers, to the audience as well for having engaged in the discussion, to our interpreters. You know, interpreters are actually the backbone of the European Union in many ways. They allow for these kinds of discussions to happen and for everyone to be comfortable with the language they're speaking. So thank you also to them and to the organizers. FES, thank you so much for having put all of this program together. And I wish you well in continuing to, you know, fight for workers' rights against these giants. They're digital, but they're also real. Thank you so much. Good luck and take care. Bye-bye.
Muito obrigado.
Muchas gracias, Cabina Española. Hasta luego.
Bye.